Hello and welcome to everyone that's just joining. Warm welcome on this Friday afternoon or morning, depending on where you're dialing in from. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes just to let everybody get onto the call. But a very happy Bi Visibility Day and looking forward to this conversation with you all today. So there are going to be a few ways in which you can engage with us today. So you'll notice onto the chat function, you can chat away to us there if you've got any questions, and you can send to those to host and the panelists, or you can send them to everybody. And there's also the Q&A function as well. So do have a think of any questions that you might have, and certainly there might be ones that come up throughout sort of the conversation as well. Let's give it another minute and let folks get onto the call. Great, let's get started. So welcome everybody to those of you that have just dialed in. Really excited to be bringing you this conversation today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Matt Cameron and I'm the Global MD of LGBT Great. And I'm joined today by a number of my colleagues. Alex will be taking the reins shortly to talk through some presentational content, and we'll also be bringing you a really interesting panel discussion as well. With lots of folks from different backgrounds and experiences as we explore the theme of bisexuality and bi erasure. Now, for me, I think Bisexuality Visibility Day is really important because this is often part of our wonderful LGBT community that is quite often the most invisible and the most silent. And I would put it to you all today, actually, one of the areas of the community, parts of the community that is the most sort of misunderstood. So a lot of these sort of stigmas prevent people understanding more about bi identities, but more importantly, have a direct impact in the way bisexual people feel. So lots to explore today. We've got some really interesting questions, and we're going to be sort of running through those. And as well, you can engage with us today in a couple of ways, by the chat function or by the Q&A function as well. So Alex has already started typing away there. So we'd love to hear your thoughts and your perspectives. We are going to be asking you to do a bit of thinking with us today. So we've got some interesting poll questions for you as well, in order to sort of try and understand a bit more about what you're thinking and what you're saying. But without further ado, I would like to introduce Matthew Smith from Rowe Price, who this conversation is in partnership with today, for some opening remarks. So over to you, Matthew.
Thank you so much, Matt. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone in the audience. And hello to all of you that are watching this later online. Welcome to our Bisexuality Day event on this September 23rd, which also marks the end of Bisexuality Awareness Week. I'm very proud and honored to speak to you today. And I would like to thank our partners at LGBT Great for collaborating with us today and to organize this event. And I would like to thank everyone in the audience and the other panelists for joining us today as well. My name is Matthias Schmitz, and I'm a senior legal counsel in the Luxembourg office of Rowe Price. And I'm also the co-chair of the EMEA chapter of our LGBTQ+ business resource group called Pride at Rowe Price. My pronouns are he and him. I'm proud to say that we at Rowe Price, one of the biggest asset managers in the world, so we do not only engage in investments and all the financial matters that come along, but also we engage internally to make the workplace a happy and good place for every associate. In our business resource group, Pride at Rowe Price, we support all LGBTQ+ associates and their allies, and we want to create an environment that allows every associate to bring their full selves to work. We care about the different needs of our associates and we support wherever we can. I'm very proud as well to say that we also engage externally with the community and organizations such as LGBT Great and others to exchange and to support even more and to organize meetings like this because it's extremely important. Therefore, we are very happy to team up with LGBT Great today and to foster our long-lasting relationship and collaboration. LGBT Great is a fantastic partner and we appreciate a lot the opportunities and activities that we can work on together, that we worked on together and that we will work together on in the future. Looking back at this year, we at Rowe Price were very happy to see the world opening up again after the pandemic. This summer, we were finally able again to march in the different Pride parades worldwide and especially in Europe. We had the opportunity to walk in the London Pride parades. We participated in the Luxembourg Pride parades and also in the parades in Frankfurt and Madrid. We were so proud to be able again to support the community in person, not only in virtual events, but really to be there on the streets to celebrate with everyone, to create awareness and to meet people from all the different backgrounds. We were also very engaged to provide internal events, educational events. We organized the book club, and we are looking forward also for an internal event that we are organizing with other business resource groups on mental health. This event will take later place this year, and we are really excited that we have this opportunity also to connect with the other resource groups. One important matter for us was also, and still is, our self-identification campaign that allows us to know more about our associates, their identity, and to create more visibility for the associates that we have, and also to see what we can do better in the future. At Rowe Price, we want to support every letter in the LGBTQ+ alphabet because they all deserve it, and the respective ongoing matters are not necessarily the same. There are different challenges, and they all deserve to have an eye on separately. This is why we also organize focused events on specific topics to share more knowledge and to create even more detailed awareness. 2 days ago, we organized an internal global Pride event on bisexuality called Getting By at Work with guest speaker Robin Ox to educate our associates and to shed more light on the different challenges that people identifying as bisexual face. And we are more than happy that we can continue this discussion here today together with all of you. I personally, and also on behalf of Rowe Price, want to thank our partners at LGBT Great one more time for this opportunity, and also thank the other panelists for being part of this event today. I'm really looking forward for an amazing discussion, and I'm really excited to hear also from the audience. As we say in Luxembourg, let's make it happen. And I would say, let's start. So thank you so much, and back to you, Matt.
Great, thank you, Matthias, for those brilliant opening remarks. And I really like the mantra, sort of get it done. It resonates really highly with me. Yeah, so in terms of what we can expect from today's conversation, we're going to look at some sort of data points around sort of bisexuality, bistigmas. We're then getting some really interesting perspectives and stories from some of our panelists. And we're going to be really sort of thinking about what more we can do to support the bi community. Now, a few moments ago, Matthias sort of talked a little bit about some of the initiatives and focus, sort of LGBT focus at sort of Rowe Price. And one thing that I would like to really shout about today is the fact that Rowe Price were one of the first 5 founding members of LGBT Great. And the first 5 members, and Fidelity was there as well, one of our panelists today is also from Fidelity. But they were one of the first organizations to believe in the idea that we had. And actually, they have got a huge track record in supporting lots of different LGBT organizations, LGBT Great, Stonewall, Power to Fly, Lesbians Who Help Tech. You know, there's lots of sort of credentials there around supporting LGBT-owned organizations. One of the other reasons I really love working with Rowe Price is because of the passion that their global Pride at Rowe network gets. And this is not just operating in one country, this is operating in multiple locations, US, UK, EMEA, and an increasing focus on APAC. And all of the network is completely associate-led. And that sends a real clear signal to me that this is really built into the fabric of the organization. And the other reason I really love Rowe is just the real focus on awareness and education, and having bold conversations and sharing those stories. And I know there's been a number of things that the organization has been doing to that end. And then finally, a really big focus for Rowe on a number of the organizational sort of pieces that we need to have in place to have an environment which is fully trans, non-binary inclusive. There's been a big focus on sort of self-ID. So, this is an organization that is really taking LGBT equality seriously, and are getting huge successes off the back of it. Now, of course, there's always more room to improve, and that's one of the other things that I really admire about Rowe is that this constant commitment to improving and looking for new ways to engage and support the LGBT community in the main, but also their associates as well, sort of internally. Now, I am going to pass the reins in a second to Alex, but I just wanted to quickly get you all thinking with me, actually. So I'm going to invite Lauren, our project manager who's on the line today, to launch a poll question. And this is a multiple choice poll question. So you should see that appear on the screen now. So the question is, in which year was the first Bisexual Visibility Day celebrated? So was it 96, 99, 2001, or 2003? So we've got a rapid amount of votes coming in, which is brilliant. So Alex, good news. We've got a really engaged group today. So thank you everybody for casting your votes. We've got about 68, 69, 70% of you that have now voted. So in which year was the first Bisexual Visibility Day celebrated? There's a few votes just coming through there. Let's close the poll, Lauren. Let's see what people are saying. Let's have a little look. Super. So we've got 5% saying 96, 18% saying 1999. We've got 35% of you saying 2001, and we've got 41% of you saying sort of 2003. So a bit of a few different answers there. Alex, do you want to talk to us a bit about what the answer is?
There you go, just getting off mute. So it was 1999 was when the first Bi Visibility Day. So yeah, 23 years in the making. So we're delighted to be with you today to talk a bit more about that and what the visibility days mean in general. And so yeah, so good job everyone who was correct, those 80% of you. There's obviously, from what I can see there, is a date that doesn't necessarily stick in people's minds, but I think hopefully moving forward it will do.
Yeah, it's been really great actually to see the date and Bi Awareness Week, of course, which is part of a bigger program, really sort of build momentum over the years. And one piece that I'd just like to leave everybody with, Alex, before I hand over to you for the short sort of presentation today, is that there's a number of new data points now that we're starting to see around bisexuality. And one of the most recent ones was released from the ONS data earlier this year, which is telling us that around 5.3% of people aged 16 to 24 in the UK currently identify as bisexual. And we also know from other data sources as well that bi respondents, bi people, are more likely to sort of experience negative mental health outcomes and conditions in comparison to gay and lesbian people. So we know that the bi community is one that we do really need to focus on supporting and empowering. But without further ado, Alex, I'm going to hand over to you to talk through some of the data points and the slides for today.
Yeah, thank you, Matt, and thank you, Matthias, as well, for those great opening words. I also resonates with me the get stuff done mantra, so that was great. I mean, I haven't got loads of slides today, but I have got a few thoughts that I wanted to share with everyone on the call today, and just to reiterate some of the kind of overall objectives for today's session, which is just to a bit of a 101. What is bisexuality? What do we mean by bisexuality? What do we mean by visibility? And explore a little bit around that, as well as what do we mean when we talk about identities, language, and terminology here. Hopefully that will then be furthered in the panel discussion, which I'm very much looking forward to later, where we will be talking a little bit more about bisexual erasure and what that means, how it manifests, and then how you can offset that by through allyship, through education, and through conversations. So yeah, please feel free to drop in any comments or questions as I go through the slides today. I'll try to be as short and sharp as possible, and then we can get straight into the best bit, which will be the discussion. But when I was looking at the history of bisexuality, visibility, and looking at some famous role models who have been bisexual, this quote stood out to me, and I think it hits the nail on the head for some of the areas we want to talk around today. So I mean, I'll never stop being attracted to women. Bisexuality is misunderstood. The adage is that you're either straight or gay or lying, but that's not my experience. To call me anything other than bisexual would be inaccurate. I think reflecting immediately just on that is a good place to start. So things we learn here: misunderstanding, this idea of lying, this idea of it being not quite straight, not quite gay, somewhere in a no man's land in the middle. And I think that that's wholly inaccurate. That the first thing we should acknowledge on Bisexuality Visibility Day is the legitimacy of bi identities, of LGBT identities, in all of their in all of their glory, really. And so with this in mind, I wanted to just establish a bit of a baseline when we're talking about identity, because that's obviously what we are talking about today. And that's through something that anyone who's joined LGBT Great sessions in the past will know that we talk about this as a nice way to enter into these conversations. And this is around the 4 pillars of identities. And this is in the context of LGBT identities, but non-LGBT as well. And so the 4 pillars themselves are gender identity, attraction, that can be romantic, sexual, or emotional, sex, so this is biological sex now, and then gender expression. And some of you may be thinking, those terms seem like they overlap quite a lot, and they do. They very much do. And the way that they overlap and the intersections between them is what defines someone's identity. So, just take me, for example. I identify as a man. So, this is my identity, how I see myself. I'm gay, so that there's an attraction piece there that is pretty clear. I was assigned male at birth. So my biological sex is that of a male, but this is where it's important to acknowledge that biological sex and gender identity are very much related, but there's not a one-to-one comparison here. When there is, so when biological sex does correlate with someone's gender identity, then that's the term where the term cisgender comes along. And then if your biological sex does not correlate with your gender identity, then that's when we get the terms trans and non-binary. So that's essentially how those two pillars interact. There's obviously then expression, which is then the externalization of your identity through clothing, through language, through your bearing, through a myriad of different ways. You can see I'm wearing a typical male shirt, although we should also acknowledge that clothing has no gender. But the expression of it is gendered in many instances. So, when we talk about bisexuality and bisexual identities here, what we're talking about attraction in many ways, and then the kind of broader context is around identity, biological sex, and expression. And when seen together, you get that fully rounded individual who's not defined just by their attraction alone, but by the interactions between these different pillars. So that's just something I wanted to share with you as a baseline for the conversation today. The other thing to acknowledge as well is that there's no one mold for anyone who is bisexual, indeed anyone in the LGBT plus community. So one thing I wanted to acknowledge was that one aspect of the conversation today does need to touch on intersectionality. And I'm sure many of you will be familiar with that term. For those that are not, essentially, when you think about yourself, you think about all of those things I just mentioned: gender identity, biological sex, attraction, and then a range of other things as well. Your socioeconomic background, the language you use, etc. And the way that these elements interact or intersect with each other can be very important to acknowledge. When we think about something like race and ethnicity, as well as sexual orientation and gender identity, there is always an overlap here in that you may be, white and cisgender, you may be white and trans, and those intersections, that Venn diagram of, race and gender identity, where they overlap, often there can be additional layers of challenges that people face. We talk a lot about privilege as well in these instances, and power, and in many instances, people with when you think about intersectionality, the people that have different identities that fall within these intersectional boundaries experience more discrimination, experience lower opportunities in certain instances, and experience, in a corporate environment, can experience challenges or underrepresentation. So when we talk about bisexuality, we have to be cognizant of the fact that this is an intersectional conversation, and all of these different aspects are important to remember, but that today we're talking about one aspect of a broader identity that everyone has. So the four pillars feed into this from an identity point of view. Then there's all of these other things as well to consider. But today we're talking about bisexuality. So I just wanted to share with you a couple of points around when we talk about bi people, what are we talking about? Of course, we're talking about people who are attracted to more than one gender. This attraction can be sexual, emotional, or romantic, so it can be any combination of those three elements along the spectrum. So it's not just a sexual attraction, but there's, we can have asexual bisexuals. This is where we get complicated in terms of the language that we're using to describe someone's expression of their sexual orientation, if that makes sense. So there's a range of ways we can talk about bisexuality and as a spectrum. And then just wanted to touch briefly on some of you may be thinking, what's the difference between bisexuality and pansexuality? For some of you who may have read articles or content online in the past, we have seen that, bisexuality has come under the pansexual umbrella and vice versa, depending on who you talk to. So I just wanted to acknowledge that bisexuality and pansexuality are often closely linked to each other, but are distinct and discrete, aspects of someone's identity. And so the difference is that someone who is pansexual is attracted to people irrespective of gender, whereas someone who's bisexual is attracted to more than one gender. So it's a subtle but kind of important difference, expressed in the fact that there is also a Pansexuality Visibility Day as well. Matt raised an interesting point earlier around representation of bi people amongst the LGBT plus community. And so in a survey done in 2021 by Gallup in the US, they found that 56.8% of LGBT plus adults identified as bisexual. So the majority of people in the LGBT plus community in the US do identify as bisexual. And that represented 15% of all Gen Z as well. So, there's a very interesting aspect here that the bisexual people are very, the incidence rate is high, and so must be included in these conversations as well. So just a brief note on bisexuality. Many of you will have joined Visibility Day webinars and sessions in the past, and I think I'd just like to reiterate why these types of sessions are important. For bi people particularly, we have seen what we call bi erasure, which is where I'm sure the panelists will have their own views and talk about it in more detail. But just very briefly, this is the idea that people deny the existence or legitimacy of bisexuality, saying, oh, well, aren't you just straight, and questioning, aren't you lying, aren't you actually really gay, all of those sorts of things. And so they ignore or remove evidence and validation for bisexual people. And unfortunately, we have seen a rise in that in the past few years. We've also seen a rise in discrimination. 31% of bi people had experienced discrimination based on their sexual orientation, according to Stonewall in 2020. We've also seen, an increase in the number of trans and non-binary people who are being targeted and who are suffering, discrimination and hate crime. So it plays into a broader narrative here and a broader reality, which is that LGBT plus rights and protections are being eroded, and bi people are also included within that, particularly around this idea of delegitimizing the bisexuality as its own valid identity, unfortunately. And as Matt mentioned, if you compare mental health conditions amongst LGBT folks, bi people do express those more likely than gay and lesbian counterparts, which is obviously concerning, and is why days like this and conversations like this and safe spaces like this are important. Not much more from me, but just briefly, we maybe talk about this more with the panel, but what are things that you can do today? So we've acknowledged that, bi people are legitimate, valid, and their identities are important, and that they are being challenged and threatened. What can you do to offset this? Well, there's a few things. The first is to, of course, education, to acknowledge yourself, acknowledge the identities and educate yourself where possible. You can recognize and challenge biphobia or bi erasure whenever you see it, encounter it, or hear it. And this doesn't have to be in a highly confrontational way. It can be as little as just saying, "Oh, ABC, could we just have a quick chat about this?" It could be having, safe space discussions. It could be joining groups. It could be spotlighting and amplifying content from underrepresented bi creators, whether that's organizationally or individually. And then where you do have the power and ability to spotlight people at work or in other networks, then trying to do that effectively and spotlight bi people where you can will be hopefully effective in creating some more of those safe spaces for conversation and inclusive environments where bi people and anyone else in the LGBT plus community can feel safe to be themselves authentically at work. So yeah. I think that's kind of everything from me. I don't think, well, I mean, I can keep going all day, but I'm very conscious I want to get into the panel. So I will hand back over to Matt. If there are any questions, I can then be available on the chat to answer those. So thank you everyone for your attention, and Matt, over to you.
Great, thanks, Alex, for that excellent overview. I think what you've done there actually is create a really good sort of foundation for a panel discussion, which we're going to get onto in a quick minute. I just want to invite everyone to do a little bit of sort of thinking with me again. So, Lauren, if we could launch poll, I'm going to launch poll 3 first, if that's okay, just before we go into the panel discussion. So you should see the question come up in front of you in a second. So that's poll 3. So which of the following topics would you like to hear about today, or more from today in our conversation? So by erasure, health and well-being of bi people, bisexuality and coming out, bisexuality and intersectionality. And hopefully there'll be some good sort of pointers here as well for the panel discussion that we're going to have in a moment. So we've got quite a lot of votes coming in very quickly. So I want to make sure that we give you all an opportunity to cast your votes. So which of the following topics would you most like to hear about today? I'll let you keep casting your votes there. We've got just sort of 70% of you that have now voted, so a few more to come through. And then just to sort of say as well, thank you for the points that are coming through to the panelists on the chat function. And for those of you that have put some things as well in the everyone chat, we will come to those as we go through the conversation today. And that's what we aim to do today, is to pick up on some of the things that you're saying and asking live in the conversation. Just while you're all sort of finishing casting your votes, I'm going to invite the panelists to switch their camera on in a moment, but we've got 4 fantastic panelists today. You've already heard from Matthias from Rowe Price, Senior Legal Counsel, and an LGBT Great Project 1000 role model. We're also joined by Fidelity International's Sarah Kaiser, who's their Head of Employee Experience, and also an LGBT Project 1000 role model, and also a steering committee member, actually, of the Diversity Project. And then we've got Irina Hajwanu, who is from Leeds Therapy, and is a psychotherapist specialising in LGBT people, and particularly actually around bisexuality as well. So we're going to be bringing a real sort of experience around mental health and some of the things that are common in the bisexual community. And then we've got Natanya as well, who's joining from Sidley Austin LLP, and actually the co-founder of the London Bisexual Network, so London's first professional network for bisexual people, and also a steering committee member of LGBT Plus Lawyers Division, and a board member as well at Open for Business. So we've got an amazing collection of speakers today. Let's go quickly back to the poll question. Lauren, if you could close the poll and let's see what people are saying, and I'll try and remember what the answers are when we get into the conversation. So, in fact, let me take a picture of the screen and I can remember. There we go. So we've got the majority of you sort of saying bisexuality and coming out. I think we can look to sort of get to that dynamic and that theme, followed by erasure and intersectionality, and then well-being as well. So really, really interesting. So thank you for sharing those. So panelists, if you'd like to switch your cameras on, let's get the conversation started. And the first question that we're going to be exploring today is this point around, bisexual people are less likely to be out and be visible. And the question is, why do we think that is? So I'd like to come to Natanya first, if that's okay, just to get your thoughts on that question.
Sure. I can talk more about being open at work, because that's what the London Bisexual Network focus on. And actually in the workplace, this is according to the last Stonewall survey on this, only 27% of bi people would feel comfortable being out at work. And that is compared to 65% for lesbian and gay respondents. And so in the London Bisexual Network, we were thinking, like, what is this? What's the data behind why this is? And apparently this is to do, well, a lot of bi people believe this is to do with the lack of visible role models. So at least in the workplace, there's only 18% of bisexual people say that there are visible role models for them in the workplace. And that is 63% of lesbian and gay respondents say that there are. So there's a real problem with senior bi visibility in law, especially. When I came in, there was no openly bi lawyers anywhere. You couldn't really talk about it in the office. It was seen like an overshare of what you like to do at the weekends, rather than a visible, a valid sexual orientation.
Sure.
So I think it really comes down to visibility, at least in the workplace.
Yeah, and there's a big sort of point in them. We can't be what we can't see, and sort of the connection to psychological safety. But those numbers and those data points really just shine a light, doesn't it, on the challenges that we've got within organisations around creating psychologically safe spaces for bisexual people. And let's go over to Sarah, if that's okay, just to get your thoughts on that. So bi people less likely to be out, and why do you think that is?
It's a really interesting question, and something that we often share with people who are learning how to be an LGBT ally is that concept that as an LGBT person, you don't just come out once, you have to come out again and again and choose to. And I think as a bi person, for me, it's hard to know when it's relevant to do that sometimes, so it doesn't seem strange or artificial. If you're gay or lesbian and you're in a same-sex relationship, it might come up quite naturally.
Yeah.
If, like me, you're bi, but you're in an opposite-sex relationship, I'm celebrating my 15th wedding anniversary this year. At what point is it then relevant to say, but you know what? If I wasn't with this person, I could be with someone of any gender,
Yes.
and it not to seem a little bit awkward and uncomfortable. So I think role models is one, and knowing how to bring it up and when it's relevant is possibly another factor.
Yeah. And that was one of the themes actually that's come through from the chat function. I think one of our attendees today has asked, how do we actually talk about this in the workplace without it being intrusive? So we'll get onto that sort of shortly. I'm really keen to go to Irini actually, just to get your thoughts. You've talked to a lot of members of the LGBT community, lots of bi people. But why do you think from your experience, from a psychotherapy perspective, that bi people are less likely to be out?
I think a lot of it has to do with internalized biphobia, because the thing we need to remember is that we all coexist, you know, regardless of our gender, sexuality, lived experience, etc. We all coexist in the same world. So if, you know, and the lack of role models contributes to this, that sense of, well, maybe there is something not quite right about me, or being unsure, you know, where you can be fully out or not, as has already been mentioned already. So there's such a lot to navigate internally, I would say, before actually making that external with how you expressed your gender, your sexuality, any of those things about yourself.
Yeah. And perhaps if we could just expand on that a little bit, this point around, you know, internalization, you know, are there perhaps some themes or some trends, patterns that you tend to see with, you know, bisexual people who are struggling? And if so, you know, what would you say that they are?
In terms of their mental health, as has been pointed out already, bisexual people consistently in research that we've seen, and I would say in my work as well, tend to really struggle more with their mental health. One thing that I try to do a lot is actually kind of normalize people's responses to stress. So in the context of LGBT kind of issues, we might be talking about microaggressions or that lack of visibility, because, you know, the external world really doesn't mirror who we are back at us. So where is that positive reinforcement? So even in saying depression and anxiety is a perfectly normal response to those cumulative stresses throughout your lifetime, and just how you're navigating the world, really.
Yeah, no, that really resonates with me actually. And one of the sort of things that I do obviously day to day at LGBT Great is listen to lots of people's stories, and an increasing number of bi people actually. And one of the things that I'm noticing is that this fear of just not feeling like you kind of belong anywhere. You know, you're not straight, you don't identify as gay or lesbian or gay woman, and people tend to feel, or lots of members of the bi community feel very lost. And sometimes there is that real sense of you know, lack of confidence, you know, lack of being able to talk about anything, so therefore don't talk about it, which obviously can have an impact on mental well-being as well. Matthias, perhaps if we bring you in there, is there any sort of points that you'd like to add on to sort of the first question, or anything that the fellow panelists have said?
Yeah, thanks, man. The only thing I would like to add is that, I mean, coming out, and it doesn't matter to whom, it's always a big challenge, whether it's to your family members, to your friends, to co-workers. But then I fully understand that for bisexuals, this is another challenge, because I feel that the society is more and more confident and is comfortable with the terms of gay and trans, and they know more what that means. But when it comes to bisexuality, then there are immediately 1,000 other questions and many doubts and many ignorant comments as well. And I think this makes it really hard then to come out, and this why I think we discussed already about it a little bit, and I'm sure we will more about this phenomenon that then bisexuals prefer to either identify as straight or gay or lesbian, instead of saying that they're bi, because they want to avoid these uncomfortable situations. And I think this is a lot of pressure then on top of the pure fact that coming out as an LGBTQ plus member is already quite challenging and really a journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of barriers, right, to feeling confident in, you know, coming out. I know it's one of the points that people raised on the poll function, and maybe therefore that one thing that we could test, you know, is it easy to come out if you're gay or lesbian in comparison to being bi? And I think my answer to that question would be yes, it is, and that's generally what we hear from the community. But of course, everybody's experiences, you know, can be very different. I wonder whether we could sort of take a few moments now just to explore, okay, what are some of the obstacles that exist for bi people? We talked a lot about bi erasure, but if we can perhaps think about, you know, some themes here, and perhaps if we can go back to you, Irene, to kick us off with this question. But what obstacles do you think that exist for bi people?
I think it's a really disempowering position to kind of operate within the binary of, you know, either in or out, gay, straight, you know, all of those sorts of things. So that's an automatic barrier. And I would say experientially, and I've had this experience kind of personally myself as a pansexual person, and also what I hear from clients that I support is just that idea of basically not being taken seriously, and that's such a real shutting down, being made silent, closing off, disconnecting from people, and that has huge effects on even just imagining to yourself in your head having a conversation about who you are openly with somebody.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think there's a lot of like misconception as well, right, about what bisexuality you know, actually is. Let's bring Natanya back in to get your views in terms of obstacles that you see.
So actually interesting at least from the LBN network, I would say acceptance by the lesbian and gay community is one of the biggest obstacles that the bi community that I speak with face. And I think a lot of that friction comes because, you know, the gay community has worked so hard for so many years to explain to straight people that being gay is not a lifestyle choice. And I think that the friction for the bi community is this on the surface looks like a choice. So the lesbian and gay people are thinking, well, it isn't a choice. You're making us look bad. You're making it look like you can choose. And my response to that really is, I did not choose to be attracted to more than one gender. That's not a choice. It might look like I'm choosing whether I'm with men or women, or, you know, because I identify as pansexual, so that's, you know, attraction irrespective of gender. So I think because the gay community see this as potentially a choice, it discredits all the hard work that they've done, and that's some of the friction. And on the other side, a lot of lesbian and gay people I've spoken to in their own coming out journey identified as bi. So they think, well, I said I was when I was coming out, therefore you must be as well. And so I think that being told by people who are within your community that you don't exist, that you don't have a valid sexual orientation is really, really is a huge barrier. And I think that's the biggest obstacle that I would say that I face on a day-to-day basis, and that the members of the LBN face. Yeah,
I think that's a really powerful point. And some of the things that I've heard, you know, from the work that I do in the LGBT space and comments that I hear, you know, bisexuality perceived as confusion or as being greedy, or midway to being gay or straight. These are a lot of the things that I've heard, you know, from conversations that I've sort of been exposed to. Sarah, I wonder whether we might bring you back in there just to build on obstacles, this point around obstacles.
Yeah, I was just reflecting on what Sidley said, and something I personally struggle with a lot about entering queer spaces and being comfortable in them is dealing with my privilege, because I'm straight passing, and so I always worry that I'm going to make other people feel uncomfortable, and that this is no longer a queer space and a safe space for them to be themselves if they see me there and they read me as straight. At the same time, I don't want to, I don't know, dress in a different way or express myself in a way that isn't true to who I am. And that's something I do struggle with, because it's important to me to be able to enter queer and LGBT spaces to celebrate that part of who I am, and yet to do so in a way that is respectful of others and authentic to me can be quite tough. I do find with the straight community, there is a tendency to over-sexualize people who identify as bi or pan, and that can be a little bit uncomfortable as well.
Yeah, so very similar sort of themes then around this, you know, misconception of the identity actually existing in its own right. So I think there's a lot more we need to do around making clear what, you know, bisexuality is. And it's a similar challenge in a way, isn't it, to the challenge of gender identity. If we think for a second, you know, the way that the human brain works is we like to put things in simple boxes. We like a yes or a no, we like gay or a straight, we like man or woman. You know, but actually there's this whole spectrum of sexual orientation and gender identity, of course, in the middle, which is, you know, it can be very confusing if you're not part of the community, or let's face it, even if you are in the community, you know, it can seem confusing. Matthias, let's bring you back in there. Any thoughts on sort of particular obstacles that you feel or have noticed that bi people face?
Yeah, and actually, I just wanted to build up on your comment, Matt, and also on the comments of the other panelists, that I feel that especially for bisexuals, there are these crazy rules that apparently automatically apply. That's when you're bisexual, you have to have like equally relationships with men and women, or if you're in a relationship with like you're a woman and you're in a relationship with a man, then you have to have outside of this relationship a relationship with another woman. And I think this is one of the biggest misconceptions, that there are rules that apply immediately, and you have to have always both genders or all gender types mixed together, and it's not accepted in a way that you can be married to one and still identify as bisexual. So I think this is really some sort of entitlement that many people have, that there has to be rules for bisexuality, and there have to be some categories that you have to, or requirements that you have to meet before you're really an authentic bisexual. So, and I think this is one of the biggest obstacles.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, this concept of being, one or the other, or bisexual, so you're attracted to women 50%, men 50%, but of course that's not the case always, right? There's this whole spectrum, and I think actually that can change. So how we start thinking and conceptualize sexual orientation, I think, is a real part of understanding more about bisexuality and bi identities. And I really want to pick up on something that's come from the chat function. And there's a point here around gender identities become more of a subject and more of a conversation. But how do we bring sort of sexual orientation and bisexuality into a corporate environment? Sexual orientation is a personal and it's an intimate subject. So how do we create that level of psychological safety without being intrusive? And I wonder, Natanya, whether you want to tackle this one first of all.
Sure. This was the problem that we had, the LBN had at the beginning. This is probably just to recap. 7 years ago, I didn't know how. I was just starting out as a trainee lawyer. I didn't know how to express that, even though I was in a long-term relationship with a man, that I wasn't straight. And I found that really difficult, and it really affected my workplace performance. I found I really struggled at the beginning trying to fit in to an environment that, first of all, I am a Black woman from a working class background who is also bi. So I had a lot of intersecting identities that were really out of place in finance and in law. So I had all of these things going around. I didn't know how to be my authentic self. It really, really affected my work. And then a mentor of mine who's a gay man said, listen, why don't you do something about that? Why don't, we support you. We want you to succeed. We have your back here. Just launch a network. We'll support you as the firm. So it was actually an ally coming from a gay man who helped me to found this network, so we could start having those professional conversations that weren't just, you were with this person this week, or, what do you do at the weekends? It brought it very much into the corporate setting. And so when I do bi visibility training for employers, I say the first step is doing a visible bi visibility event, where you show that the firm is inviting clients, it's talking about it publicly in the senior positions. So then bi employees feel comfortable about saying, oh, I'm bi. That really resonates with me. I'm happy you brought that up. And it allows a safe space to talk in a professional manner about being bi, just like we do about being gay and about being a lesbian and about being straight. So I think that's what I would say on that topic. Yeah.
And what I really like about what you said there is that there's this point around, you had a mentor, you had somebody that, was sponsoring you, encouraging you, giving that confidence to step up and give you that space, if you like, invite you to that space to have that conversation. I think this really shines the light on the role of sponsors and allies, right? A big part of the sort of conversation today. And Irene, I wonder whether you want to sort of come in off the back of that. Obviously, Natanya's talked a bit about organizational context, whether you want to sort of give us a bit of sort of context outside of the workplace and maybe more generally in society.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we talk about sexuality, we understandably kind of just focus on sexual attraction, but as has already been pointed out here today, it could be romantic attraction or just even kind of interest. And actually, if we're talking about visibility, it's important to point out that there are asexual people who would also identify as bisexual or pansexual. So I think to really speak to people that are worried about talking about sexuality, and does that maybe mean talking about sex necessarily? It's really important, I think, to think of sexuality as how has that element of somebody's identity really influenced their lived experiences, their point of view, their perspective, how they see and experience the world. And I think really that's what we're talking about when we think of sexuality as a part of someone's identity, and also takes a little bit of the heat out of it with people feeling that maybe they're being intrusive in some way.
Yeah, brilliant perspectives. I don't know, Sarah, anything you wanted to sort of add on to that?
Yeah, I mean, two things, if that's okay. The first is part of the reason I wanted to be on this panel is to help with this. I think just hearing people sharing their stories can be so powerful to make others feel comfortable to come forward. It's not a big thing to do, although it can feel quite scary the first time. But also there's some really simple things we can do as organizations to make people feel comfortable. I think we so often just roll the LGBT acronym off the tongue without taking the time to talk individually about each aspect of it, and just doing that is incredibly powerful. And I'd really like to give a shout out to the people who run our Allies program, Ollie Shakir Khalil and Lisa Cuddy, because they always start it by reminding people that you don't have to be cis and straight to be an LGBT ally, that each part of the LGBT community can be an ally to the other parts of the community, which I find incredibly powerful. And it's just simple things like this which remind us that all the different aspects of LGBT are equally valued and we can all be ourselves at work.
Yeah, brilliant. So I think, again, building on to the points from before, this point around allyship, right, and thinking about that, but actually making sure that we get a lens on allyship which speaks to everybody. And there are lots of different parts of the community. And I think sometimes in organizations, I think, yeah, we say LGBT plus, you know, and we put everyone in the same place, right? But everyone's experience is very, very different. So leading, how we humanize this conversation around allyship as it relates to different communities, I think is very important. How we approach this with empathy, you know, and being able to try and put yourself in somebody else's shoes that maybe has got lots of different identity dimensions, you know, as part of their identity, I think is really key. But stories is actually the one thing that you said as well. Sharing those stories, creating those spaces, and the role of leadership potentially in giving confidence to take those spaces. Matthew, is there anything you want to sort of add to that just before I go back to the chat function there?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So for me, it's really important for organizations to create a forum for everyone to be open and to be comfortable to share their stories.
Yes.
So it's not an obligation for anyone to open up, but if they want to, or if they feel the need for support, that they should have someone to talk to or to reach out to. And what I experience at Rowe Price, for example, is that we have these different means where you can interact. You do not have to come out if you don't want to, but if you have some questions or you need support, then you have an address and you have different persons that you can reach out to. And I think this is the most important. And as well as the straight people, they are not forced to talk about their private life or their intimacy. Then of course none of the LGBTQ plus members has this obligation either, but there are some easy ways to make it more comfortable for everyone, using like more neutral words like partner instead of husband and wife. Things like this make it already quite easy and more comfortable for everyone to find a common ground. And I think there are many different steps that you can take. And what I feel, it's also very important to provide as much as education and to share as much knowledge as you can, because this, I think, is often, it's not the ignorance, it's just people do not know, or they're afraid to ask. And you really have to take everybody from the place that they are. Some people really start with no knowledge at all. Some are really knowledgeable already. And I think you have to build on this and provide different trainings and different opportunities for people to learn where they stand, and to lead them a little bit there.
Yeah, and look, I think it's really hard to navigate, you know, as an organization, you know, making sure we provide those spaces for everybody. But I am a big believer in, you know, teamwork and making sure that we're looking across the year and thinking, actually, how can we tie in perhaps a conversation about mental health and bring an LGBT lens to that? Or actually, if we're talking about race and ethnicity, how do we bring you know, a gender or an LGBT lens to this conversation? So I think we've got to get a bit more sophisticated in the way that we talk about diversity and inclusion in the workplace. One of the things I often sort of hear from LGBT people in all financial services organizations is, you know, all we ever tend to see in networks is you know, white cis men who are gay, and everyone else, you know, is kind of in the background and invisible. So I think we've got to really work hard at creating these spaces, which is why it's so good to be, you know, leading with this conversation today, you know, through the lens of bisexuality. There's quite a few sort of, the chat function is literally going on to overdrive. So I'm going to try and sort of pick up on some of the themes that we're getting sort of coming through. One of the things I am sort of seeing is, how do we have a conversation at work without being intrusive? I think we've talked about that, you know, allyship, creating the spaces, awareness conversations, sending those signals. And we know, again, you know, with LGBT folks, when they see a conversation or a signal that resonates with them or their identity, what I hear is that feels really good. So I think, creating those spaces essential. Sorry, my watch is talking to me. We also got some points coming here as well. A lot of curiosity around bisexuality and bi-identity. So it shows that, the fact we've got 165 people on the line today. It's a topic that people want to sort of hear more about. There's a point here around I'm in a heterosexual relationship, have been for over 10 years. I never know whether to tell people I'm bi, but it's a big part of my identity. Is it relevant? I find it a tricky one, which really highlights, perhaps the feeling of uneasiness and lack of confidence around bi identities, even in sort of bi people. We've got a point here that Sarah that's come up. So love to hear a bit more from Sarah as a bi person, also in a long-term relationship with someone of the opposite sex. I find it difficult to bring up or say when I'm bi, my choice. How have you sort of navigated that? Would you like to answer that question, or I've kind of put you on the spot there, so sorry.
Sure. So sometimes I've navigated it more clumsily than others. The way I came out to my family, I wouldn't recommend. It was in the middle of a family argument, and I just, not the ideal way to do it. But at work, I find people just often talk about relationships, and it opens up avenues. So for example, if people are talking about a celebrity crush, I might say a woman as well as a man, or just and then you can kind of see people react and go, oh, I wouldn't have expected that. Or very simply just being willing to put that description to yourself when you're talking about why something matters. I used to think that when I was talking about the importance of LGBT inclusion, if I said that I was coming from at this as a member of the LGBT community, it might undermine what I was saying. People might think it was self-interested. And over time, I've learned it's the opposite. It gives so much more credibility to be able to say, as a member of the LGBT community, I know this is going to make such difference. And it's just having that confidence to put that label on yourself can make such a powerful difference. So I just recommend try it, practice it. You might not always get the best reaction. I've had some people say some funny things to me in my time, not of fidelity, but I think you'll find generally people are really positive, and so many people identify as bi. Maybe they do too, and they're waiting to hear from you before they feel able to open up themselves.
Yeah, brilliant thoughts there. I wonder, Irini, is there anything that you wanted to sort of build on off the back of Sarah's point there?
Yeah, definitely. One concept I've been using a lot with people I support is the idea of inviting in rather than coming out, because I think coming out can be quite a Western idea sometimes. Not everybody, it's not safe for every single person to come out in every single space that they're in. So rather than say the pressure to make a big announcement and then it's out there and that's it, the concept of inviting in, I believe, is much more empowering. It's a case-by-case basis. Who am I inviting into knowing who I am? And I also think that restores a little bit of just holding your own privilege and saying, I'm letting you know, and that's a really special and important thing, as opposed to just a thing that other people should just be able to take from you, in a sense.
Yeah, I love that concept of inviting in. Natanya, anything that you'd like to sort of pick up on there?
Yeah, so I'm very intentional about being visibly bi, because I said when I came into the profession, there weren't role models for me. So the LBN, we felt like we had to become those role models that weren't there for us, for junior people coming into the profession. And so it is uncomfortable, but I just have to find ways, because I'm married to a man. I have to find ways of saying I'm bi, by the way. Oh, you said this thing, actually I'm bi. And so it can be exhausting, but I feel like it's on, I'm lucky. I've been successful in my career. I'm now in a more senior position. It's on me now to make sure I am being the role model that I was resentful wasn't there for me. So that's my approach to it. But I'm also privileged enough to be living in London, in a city that is very inclusive. So I can do that. And, I'm in an international law firm where they're very accepting of my identity. I appreciate not everybody can do that, but for those of us who can, I feel like it's our responsibility to be openly bi.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes back to this point around role models, doesn't it? Psychological safety, confidence. We know all of these factors are sort of related to how we feel, how we be, how we belong, and how we perform at work. We're coming into literally the last 5 minutes now, and I always like to set myself a target of finishing a few minutes early. So I'm going to see if I can do it. But the one last thing I'd like to ask all of the panelists, we talked a little bit about this question before, but the one thing that we can do to move bi visibility, inclusion, awareness forward. So the one thing that we can do, and just to get your input on that, and then what we can do is wrap up for today. I think it's been a really brilliant conversation. Perhaps Matthias, if we could come to you first of all in terms of your one tip.
Yeah, thanks. For me, it's really sharing knowledge and using inclusive language to make it easier for people to just talk about it. And when you hear someone making comments, then to really speak up and say when things are not right. So it doesn't have to be in the big public, but then maybe later talk to this person in private and say, this is not really okay. I think this would make things already easier, because often things are said without knowing the impact that it has on the person. So just raising this and making people aware that there are things that they don't need to understand maybe, but they need to respect it. I think this would be already be very helpful.
Yeah, so there's something in here, isn't there, about, got to create awareness, but we've also got to equip people to have conversations. I always like calling in rather than calling out. It's a little bit like Irina's phrase there. But people hear things that are happening perhaps in the workplace that maybe the conversation's a little bit below the line or not quite right. Actually, are we giving employees the confidence that they need how to navigate that conversation and call in? So I think there's definitely something in that. Let's go to Sarah. How about your one tip?
Just creating that safe space where people can be themselves, whoever they are, just through the way you don't make assumptions about them, using inclusive language, and by being open about who you are, I think you make others more comfortable to be open about who they are too.
Yeah, awesome. So this point around, are we signaling bi inclusivity or LGBT inclusivity, and are we providing those spaces to share those stories? Are we inviting in? Irina, let's go back over to you. That's okay. Your one tip.
Yeah, I would say silence perpetuates invisibility. So I think to really push back against that idea of like myths around bisexual people, which we do have to dispel. If it's safe and viable for you to speak out whenever you can, just more conversations really, and even just signaling to yourself your bisexuality, your pansexuality, just expressing it in what you wear, how you choose to style yourself. That's important.
Brilliant, love that. And let's go over to Natanya, last but not least.
I guess mine's directed to employers and employee networks, which is have visible, high-profile bi-visibility events with senior stakeholders. I think that's my key one, to create that safe space that the rest of the panelists were talking about for the employees.
Awesome. And mine is going to be, other than agreeing with you all, but join the London Bisexual Network. So absolutely get involved there. It's a great network. I've heard really great things. Do some great events, great training. So if you are interested, you can get in touch with Tanya after this. Super. Well, that brings us to the end of today's conversation. So we're we are 58 now. And just very quickly, just to give you a bit of an idea about what next. So we will share an email early next week with a copy of the video recording and some of the slide content from today as well. If you've got any questions or any of the things that we've talked about are impacting you positively or negatively, you can get in touch with us, and we're here to listen and here to help. The next event that we've actually got a conversation happening at the end of next week about the power of now, and we're going to be exploring some LGBT DE&I themes and looking at our IBIT framework as well in terms of driving action. And then we've got a Lesbian Visibility Day event in partnership with City happening, which is a face-to-face event in the first week in October. So if you go to LGBT Great /events, you can find out about those there. And yeah, I just want to say thank you to everybody. I'm sure all the panelists agree as well. We can see all the chats that's been coming through, and it's really good to see the level of engagement today. And I think this really sends a loud and clear signal that we need to make these conversations happen more. And you've got our commitment to doing that, and I'm sure all of you as well. And then finally, just a huge thank you to the panelists and for Rowe Price as well, for stepping up to the plate and leading this conversation with us today. And without further ado, I hope you all have an amazing weekend. So thank you very much. Take care. Bye.